Good morning and peace be upon you wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Qasim Rashid, and this is the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We've got a phenomenal show lined up. Congressman Ro Khanna, the Democratic representative of the 17th District of California, is here, and we're talking everything from Gaza to the Epstein files to immigration to the shutdown and what we need to do to stop Trump and his agenda. I also talked to him about the future of the Democratic Party, whether the party needs new leadership. For me, the answer is yes. To hear what he has to say, stay tuned. I'm going to talk a bit more after the conversation with Congressman Khanna about a concept called soft secession. It's a term that most people have not heard before, and you've heard of how it's been applied, you just never heard it described that way. And I'm going to argue that soft secession is what we need to be doing right now. In a phrase, soft secession is nonviolent non-cooperation with the federal government. It's been applied numerous times throughout American history with varying degrees, but inevitable success. And I think this is a time, especially as we have a complete failure of the federal government to apply soft secession right now. I also want to discuss some developing stories here out of Chicago. As many of you know, I have been going to the Broadview ICE facility to protest these ICE fascists. And this week, something remarkable happened, remarkably bad, to be clear. They have charged Kat Abughazalah, who's running for Congress here in Illinois, with a federal indictment on conspiracy charges. If convicted, she faces up to 6 years in prison. And this is an area where I think we all need to be very closely attuned and be paying very close attention, because I've been there with Kat Abughazalah. I've protested at the same time that she protested with hundreds, if not thousands, of other people at the Broadview facility. And I can attest through my own testimony, you've seen my videos on this, we have been entirely peaceful. Any violence whatsoever, any escalation of violence has come exclusively through ICE fascists, through them putting up fences, barriers, requiring police to arrest us or asking police to arrest us, shooting pepper balls and some kind of spray material at us, firing rubber bullets, hitting journalists. Every bit of escalation of violence has come through ICE. And so now, for the federal government to step in with an indictment, to me, is another escalation of the violence. Now they are using the power of the law to silence peaceful dissent, even though the First Amendment is explicitly clear that we have the right to peaceful protest and dissent. What they are engaging in is absolute violence. As you recall, they shot Pastor Black in the head as he was literally praying in front of the ICE facility. No threat, unarmed, literally praying, and they shot him in the head with a rubber bullet. That could have been extraordinarily damaging. Fortunately, he's okay. But nonetheless, that is an act of violence by a state against a peaceful, unarmed protester. And whether you're left or right, you should stand on the side of the First Amendment with Kat Abughazalah to say that this is fundamentally wrong. There can be no justification to charge somebody with a federal crime for the simple act of exercising your First Amendment right. We're going to have that discussion in a bit more detail. But right now, we're going to go to break. And when we come back, we're going to be speaking to Congressman Ro Khanna, who has been a progressive champion on all the issues we care about: universal health care, ending the genocide in Gaza, stopping the funding of Netanyahu, and getting new blood into our party, new leadership into our party. We'll talk a bit more about what that looks like and what that means. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because we need your support to continue to build. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. I am privileged to invite Congressman Ro Khanna of California's 17th District. Congressman, thank you for being with us today.
Qasim, thank you for having me.
You know, you're one of the people I look to for the moral compass of our party, of our country. You've been on the right side of every major issue, whether it's universal health care, getting corporate money out of politics, banning stock trading for members of Congress, banning members of Congress from being lobbyists, and certainly calling out the genocide in Gaza for what it is. And I want to start there right now, because a few weeks ago, we saw accolades come in from across Republicans and Democrats commending Donald Trump for finally securing a ceasefire, which as we know, could have been secured years ago if we just stopped funding Netanyahu, a credibly accused war criminal. And I was skeptical. I was hopeful that it would hold, but I was also extraordinarily skeptical because we know Netanyahu's history. And now reports are this week that he has resumed massive, heavy bombing in Gaza. What are you hearing, and what is media not reporting on this right now?
Well, Qasim, thank you for your moral voice. My voice comes from listening to the human rights activists and grassroots mobilization of Americans, not just Muslim Americans or young Americans, many Americans who just were horrified by our support of Netanyahu in the killings that the UN has clearly now said is a genocide, and that killed and destroyed homes, over 60,000 women and children. Life expectancy went from 75 to 40. So I voted, along with 37 other Democrats, against the $14 billion supplemental aid to Netanyahu. It was probably one of the hardest votes that I've taken. I led a letter that was surprisingly controversial, calling for Palestinian recognition in a Palestinian state. And AIPAC has started attacking me ever since then. And I thought, 150 other countries around the world have called for this. Why is the United States lagging? Like many people, I was hopeful when the deal took place, hopeful that the bombing stopped and that Israel Netanyahu would withdraw and that the hostages were released. And of course, we saw the heartwarming scenes of some of the hostages coming back to their families. But I was skeptical because Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and Netanyahu's plan has been to push out the population in Gaza. And you just saw that Netanyahu broke the ceasefire. I read this New York Times this morning, 100 people killed. 100 people killed.
Yep.
It's horrific.
It's become almost like the Onion had a headline that came out that after the alleged ceasefire was signed, that Netanyahu agrees to go back to killing Palestinians less often. And it's like this dark humor, but that's exactly.
It'd be funny if it weren't so sad
true.
and grotesque, right? I mean, it's 100 lives gone.
So, Congressman, I can draw a straight line from Netanyahu killing 100 innocent civilians in Gaza just because he wants to Donald Trump bombing and killing 57 fishermen off of boats with no credible evidence that they were criminals or drug dealers. Even if they were, that doesn't warrant capital punishment. What remedies do we have? How do we get to a place where we can stop these killings and actually follow due process of law, actually uphold international law?
Well, the Democratic Party has failed to be a moral voice in foreign policy. We have been the go-along party. We acquiesced with the war in Iraq. I started my career running against a Democrat who supported the war in Iraq in George W. Bush's time. Mm-hmm. We were part of the war in Yemen. I led with Bernie Sanders a war powers resolution to stop us from refueling Saudi planes that were creating the biggest humanitarian crisis in Yemen. And then we gave a blank check to Netanyahu. We watched as he murdered women and children and did not do anything. In fact, we were supplying him with offensive weapons and billions of dollars of aid. And those of us who were screaming, saying, no, we can't be giving this aid, were sort of marginalized at the time in the party. So the Democrats need to stand up for human rights, not just when it comes to Israel and Palestine, but when it comes to Venezuela. I mean, how many folks have we seen in the Democratic Party saying what's going on is blatantly illegal? I talked to a senior Republican, and they said that they were talking to the president, vice president, and Secretary Hexet, and they were laughing like a video game as they were killing these Venezuelans, and these are his words. They said they think of them like animals. And some of these people have turned out to be fishermen and boatsmen with no connection to the trades. Venezuela makes no fentanyl, and the cocaine, some of it that comes there is being interdicted. It's not the place where of the drug trade. They're trying to have a regime change war. That's and yet our party is so hesitant to speak out against this kind of foreign policy that we don't have credibility.
Well, and it translates to domestic policy too, right? I mean, it was the '94 crime bill passed and the welfare reform bills passed under a Democratic president. It was, Obama increasing drone strikes. It was, Biden seeing ICE commit sexual abuse. The Guardian came out with an article 6 years ago that under the Trump regime, first one, there was 5,000 credible cases of sexual abuse, and under the Biden administration, ICE funding increased. So I guess my question is, and it might be a tough one, but I know you're up for the job. Does the Democratic Party need new leadership? After we win back the House and Senate, do we need new leadership who are not named Chuck Schumer or Hakeem Jeffries?
Well, we certainly need a new generation of progressives, and I'm backing a lot of progressives like Zohran Mamdani, like Kat in Chicago, like Graham Plattner. I mean, across the country, I'm backing new progressive leaders. I think we need a new generation in the Senate in particular. I mean, Schumer still hasn't endorsed Mamdani. He had caved during the shutdown and hasn't been bold on foreign policy at all or domestic policy. I do think that the House has been more willing to engage in progressive policies because we have a strong 100-person congressional progressive caucus. But I'd like to see some of those folks in leadership when we win back the House.
I love it. I mean, I think it's a necessity. When you have, for example, going back to Gaza, 92% of Americans, of the Democratic Party, wanting to stop funding Netanyahu, and party leadership says, nope, we're going to continue to fund him. It just shows a level of detachment that I'm not sure why they're not understanding, but it's devastating, and especially right now. And I think this is one of the reasons why Graham Plattner came on the scene so effectively, is he was adamant, not one more bomb for Gaza. When we can't even fund our own schools and our own hospitals here at home. And I know, the genocide is wrong in and of itself, but for him to make that connection, which is what I want to talk about right now, on the economic aspect of it, new polling has come out that people don't really know what the Democratic Party's message is anymore. They don't really know what the party stands for, what the defining aspect of the party is. I know you've kind of worked hard to define economic patriotism. You worked to define a working family's approach to it. Under your leadership, what would you want the party to do? What direction would you want the party to go in defining what this party actually stands for the next 2 years, for the next decade?
By economic patriotism, I mean that our highest mission should be to tackle the economic inequality and economic divides that are tearing this country apart. That we need to be the party that provides a roadmap out of the economic pessimism and the fact that 70% of Americans don't believe in the American dream, and have the economic independence and economic success of every family and community as our highest priority. What does this mean concretely? We should have a wealth tax on the billionaires in my district. I don't understand how this is a hard policy for everyone else who has far fewer billionaires. We should have Medicare for all. We should have childcare at $10 a day. We should have free public college and free trade schools, 1,000 trade schools across this country to create jobs, especially in a time of AI. We should have a living wage. We need to have a Marshall Plan for America where we're creating jobs, both with the private sector and the government across this country at a time where we're seeing so much automation. So I think the Democratic Party needs to have a real vision for the economic future of this country that says you can't just have islands of prosperity and large places of decline. And then to paint Trump as kind of passe, that he's offering tariffs and land grabs as a solution to modern economic hope, and it's just not the case. But you have not seen a transformational economic message come out of the Democratic Party.
Not since FDR. I mean, that's that's kind of the last time we had one, and we saw how popular he was, and that's why I don't understand why we're not going back to those popular messages. Congressman, would you support a jobs guarantee and a universal basic income policy?
I support a jobs plan. I mean, I called for a future workforce administration, which would basically say that if you're young and you're not being able to be hired, the federal government will provide you with a job or help you get an apprenticeship, either in your local community that will employ you so that you can work in education and childcare and building things in parks, or in the federal government to make government services better and to manage data and technology. This is a big challenge, youth unemployment, and it also would help for people who may be displaced middle age, especially again, we're seeing all these layoffs with AI at Amazon and Microsoft and Intel. So that kind of a future jobs program, I think, is key, and it's modeled after actually what happened in FDR. The only thing I would say is that it needs to be both federal government, but also the private sector. 85% of jobs are in the private sector, but the federal government can play a role by financing apprenticeships and training programs so people have the choice of what they want to do.
And the thing about these programs is that all the studies done show that these not only increase economic vitality, they lower crime rates, they improve health because people have finances. I mean, it's just a win-win. And it speaks to the influence of billionaires that's preventing this from happening. Going back to your point about economic patriotism, you represent Silicon Valley. I think you, correct me if I'm wrong, you represent more billionaires than anyone else in the country, or you're among the top couple. With the AI kind of revolution happening and data centers being built, at an exponential rate, how do you ensure there are jobs when the alleged AI boom is supposed to cut so many of them away? How do you strike that balance between innovation and economic sustainability?
Well, first is to create the workforce jobs administration that I talked about, so that young people can get hired. If a young person goes without a job in what they graduated in for 3-4 years, that will hurt their earnings for the next 40 years. And so why are we not having a government step in and provide jobs, both for people who are right out of high school or college and can't get employed, or for people who are being laid off? Second, we need to incentivize hiring people, not hiring robots. Right now, the tax code provides much more of an incentive for depreciation for robots. We actually need to be providing the incentive to hire people. Third, we need trade and schools across this country to get people the jobs that are going to exist. For example, someone who learns basic AI, you don't need coding to be able to work at a business, to understand data marketing or increasing sales, or someone who becomes a plumber or an electrician or a drone technician or surgery technician. There are all these tech trade jobs in addition to the traditional trades that we need. And that's why I've called for 1,000 trade schools and AI academies across this country. So we need an economic strategy. Right now, there's no strategy. It's just basically let the billionaires do whatever they want. And they're talking, Elon Musk is tweeting out about eliminating all jobs. If the government isn't saying, no, we can't have an AI that is eliminating things, we need an AI that's enhancing human productivity, and we need workers sharing in it, then we're going to see even a greater economic divide.
I want to shift gears to you and Thomas Massie. I think you two represent arguably two ends of a spectrum on the political spectrum, where you're seen as a strong, principled progressive, and he's seen as kind of this far-right firebrand. But on this issue of the Epstein files, you guys have done some pretty phenomenal work and rallied some pretty significant names to the cause. Ideally, we're one vote away, which as soon as Speaker Johnson decides to swear in the representative-elect from Arizona, we would have 218 votes. We all know the Epstein files has been a big issue, and Trump is trying to distract from them as much as possible with every conceivable distraction imaginable. Kind of a very basic question. What do you think is in them that he's so afraid of? Like, is it the worst is what we can imagine? But kind of what do you know sitting from your vantage point?
Well, having talked to the survivors' lawyers who've seen the files, I think there are a lot of people who are friends of his, who are donors, who are implicated, either in covering up for Epstein or as part of this farm system of people who had sex with these women, and in some cases abused them, and in some cases where they were underage. And that
which would be rape. I just want to be clear. I don't want anyone to take our quotes out of context. That would be sexual abuse and rape of young girls. That's what we need.
Yes, no, I'm careful in there because we know for a fact that there is sexual abuse by Epstein, and we know there's cover up, and we know that some of these girls were farmed out to others. We don't know until it's released whether the other men abused and raped young girls, or whether they raped and abused them after age, and that's what we all need to figure out, right? But that has to all come out. We do know that they covered for Jeffrey Epstein. And we also know that some of these people were implicated in Mar-a-Lago.
That's right. And I think that's where I'm just shocked to see the cult of the MAGA Trump kind of run on this and then now kind of back off and say, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe we shouldn't be rushed to judge. And I think that's what's frustrating about this. Let's talk about 2026. We've got elections coming up in November. Hopefully they go well. I'm confident they will. 2026, what is a message that Democrats need to start pushing right now to ensure that we can actually win the House and the Senate? Because so far, and we talked about this a little bit earlier in the show, the message is basically we're not Trump, which I'm sorry, it's just not a winning message. It wasn't a winning message in 2016. It barely won in 2020, and it lost again in 2024. So what is the message that we need to get across? If you're talking to the young person, to the voter who maybe is apathetic or doesn't know what we stand for, what are we offering as a party to voters in 2026?
Well, first of all, we need to be the party that stands up against these wars, to say that we will not provide a blank check to Netanyahu. We will stop Donald Trump from getting into a war in Venezuela. We're not going to fund that. We're not going to have a bloated defense budget over $1 trillion. Second, we've got to say that we're the party that's going to tackle the actual cost of living. We're going to cap rents. We will push for Medicare for all at a time where even Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying that health insurance is broken. We are going to have a bold universal child care program so that young people can have child care, and a housing program so that you can cap the interest rates for your first house and stop Wall Street from buying up these single family homes. And we're going to push for free college and 1,000 new trade schools so people can get jobs, and actually have a jobs program for the young people who are graduating who are having a hard time getting jobs. I mean, anyone who's talked to young people either out of high school or college knows that that's the case. So I think we need both a human rights vision, because young people do vote on foreign policy. They don't vote on the details of foreign policy, but they vote on an America that is moral. And we need a clear economic vision of how we're going to turn things around for people who are struggling.
And we're down to our last couple of minutes, so I want to ask, this might be a little bit longer answer, but I'm an American Muslim, and I've run for Congress. I've run against a Republican and a Democrat. And I can tell you both times I faced almost the exact same types of attacks on my faith, on my ethnicity, on the fact that I'm an immigrant. Well,
I went on my third try, so you got to do it one more time.
We'll see when the right time comes along. I never say never, and I actually look towards your example as an example of somebody who laid the groundwork, persisted, and now has been seismic, not just in winning, but in your impact in Congress and across the country. So I'm not giving up hope. I guess the point I want to make, though, and we're seeing this with Zohran Mamdani, the bigotry we're seeing from Republicans against him can almost exactly be mimicked by the bigotry we're seeing from Democrats against him. We saw, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand accuse him of wanting to wage global jihad. We saw Andrew Cuomo say the same thing. And there's the same trash coming out of the New York Post and out of the Wall Street Journal. When we talk about our party being a big tent party, because the thing is, I don't expect anything out of Republicans at this point. I think they've kind of hitched their wagon to a white nationalist movement that is the white supremacy of yesteryear, and they're trying to revive that. So I don't actually expect them to do anything different. But what I do expect is our party to be able to stand up and say, hey, we're not going to tolerate this. But right now, anti-Muslim hate, Islamophobia is a pretty acceptable form of bigotry within the party. You've been a champion for justice and humanity, for the American Muslim community. People look to you because they trust you, because you've led by example. How do we get more Ro Khannas in Congress? How do we get, and I guess that's kind of the question, how do we make your, inclusive vision the mainstream one, as opposed to kind of this tepid, well, this might upset AIPAC, so I'm not going to, support Zohran. How do we make that shift happen in the next couple of years?
Well, I believe it will happen. We need to have the boldness of people like you and Zohran to run. It's why I'm going to New York on Saturday to stand with him in solidarity. And they're calling it a Muslim South Asian rally. And someone said, you're going to go with Zohran, with a lot of other brown people and Americans? I said, yes, intentionally, because it will be a powerful signal to see a Hindu American representing Silicon Valley introducing the next mayor of New York, who's a Muslim American, both South Asian. And I think that that is a story of how far America has come. And sometimes we forget because we are confronted daily with Islamophobia, with hate, with anger, with an anti-Black agenda and erasing history. We forget that the progress that this country has made, almost in spite of itself. So I am hopeful. Zoran's campaign makes me hopeful. I think, as you know, when you run for office, particularly if you're different, you suffer a lot of indignities, and you have to have as you do, a thick skin of tuning it out. But I believe that we're on the side that's going to make America proud of becoming the first cohesive multiracial democracy. And I don't have much patience for people in our coalition who are running away from the immigrant community, from the trans community, from standing up for women's rights and voting rights and human rights, and saying, let's just talk about the price of eggs. I don't think that inspires anyone. We have to offer a alternative vision of patriotism and what that means if we're going to win back this country.
Beautifully said. And last thing before you go, Congressman, you've been in Congress now for what, 4 terms now?
Fifth term.
Fifth term now. Amazing, a decade. What's next for Congressman Khanna? What's the long-term plan? Because you're clearly painting a vision of leadership on the national level. What can you share about your long-term plans?
Well, look, I'm right now focused on winning back the House and making sure we elect a lot of new progressives up and down the ballot, whether in the mayor seats or in the Congress seats or in the Senate seats. But long term, I think that we need to have a progressive party, and I want to be part of making sure we have a progressive leadership and progressive nominees leading this party for the next 20 years. So I will be part of the conversation about how we make sure we can have progressives. I wish, candidly, Bernie Sanders was 15 years younger. I think he would be the unanimous presidential choice, but we definitely need to build on what he accomplished.
Well said. Congressman, thank you for spending time with us today. Hope to have you back on soon.
Thank you, Qasim.
Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, and definitely hit that subscribe button if you're listening on Substack. I have no paywall. I will never have a paywall. I only want you to be a paid subscriber if it's in your budget. But whether paid or free, I would welcome your support. I do welcome your support because we need to continue to build independent platforms to push back against the disinformation we're seeing. And I'm grateful to, I think we have 155,000 subscribers on Substack, only 20,000 on YouTube. So you guys, come on, pick it up over there on YouTube. Before we get into the final part of the show where I want to talk about soft secession, I want to provide you an update with what's happened with progressive House congressional candidate Kat Abughazalah. I'm reading from an MSNBC article right now. Had a chance to speak with her team on the political side, not on the legal side. But these charges are stemming from protests outside an ICE facility in Broadview, Illinois. As many of you know, I've been protesting at Broadview, Illinois for several months now, and I can attest to the peaceful nature of our protests. No one's bringing weapons. No one's threatening law enforcement officers. As a matter of fact, ICE just put out a study that shows, by their own admission, they've had 0 officers ever be killed in the entire history of the organization by any immigrants or by anyone whatsoever. It's actually a pretty safe job, according to their own data. Now, Kat is running in Illinois for Congress, and they're charging her with 2 counts. One is a conspiracy to impede or injure an ICE officer and assaulting or impeding that officer while he was engaged in his official duties. The indictment specifically accused Abughazalah, among others, of banging aggressively on the windows, hoods, and other areas of the agent's car, pushing against it to hinder and impede its movement, and etching the word pig on the car. I don't understand how it's a threat to a person's life to stand outside and bang on a window, if that's exactly what she's being charged for. The indictment names 5 other defendants, at least some of whom appear to be involved in progressive politics. The charges, among the most serious recently brought against prominent protesters, carry prison sentences of up to 6 years on the conspiracy count and 8 years for assaulting the officer upon conviction. Over the past month, as videos of protests and arrests and aggressive immigration enforcement rates have gone viral, and as right-wing politicians and influencers have beaten the drum for an even more aggressive response, the federal law enforcement officials have prioritized the arrest and prosecution of individuals they claim are interfering with the crackdown. And of course, among them is Kat Abughazalah. She's been one of the hundreds, I would say probably more than 1,000 protesters regularly gathering at the Broadview ICE facility. And again, I've been to these protests. I've been outside of ICE maybe a dozen times. I mean, it's not a small number. And I can attest to the fact that we've been peaceful. There's no weapons. There's no violence involved. All the violence has been ICE shooting pepper balls at us, ICE shooting rubber bullets at journalists, ICE putting up barriers and barricades and illegal fences that they had to then take down. Kat was quoted by MSNBC calling these charges political prosecution and a gross attempt to silence dissent, a right protected under the First Amendment. She says that she is not going to back down and that she will continue to fight and push forward. And look, I agree with her. You have to fight this. Look, at the end of the day, whether you're a bleeding heart liberal and progressive or a right-wing MAGA, it doesn't really matter on the First Amendment. If you're going to allow the government to violently prosecute someone who's peacefully protesting, you're setting a really bad precedent, and you're inviting an opposition party to come and do the same to you. I have been absolutely clear that as long as someone is not actively promoting violence or actively bringing weapons to these protests and using those weapons, peaceful protest has to remain peaceful and it has to be protected. The fact that this regime is trampling upon the First Amendment is an outrage. And the folks on the right who are silent, I'm just telling you guys, this is not going to end well for anybody. We need solidarity here. We need to push past these culture wars and recognize that this is an existential threat for the First Amendment. There's a lot of things by folks on the right that I don't like and I don't agree with. But I'm not going to say we just censor them just because I disagree with them. Of course, my line is going to be if someone's actually and actively calling for violence and promoting violence, that's a different conversation. But that's not what happened here. That isn't what has happened here. I can attest to that through my own eyewitness testimony that there was no violence, except what ICE escalated in their violence to us. And as I quoted earlier, ICE's own study shows that they have never suffered a single death. And I don't want them to throughout their time of being active. And so a lot of this to me is concocted, is definitely federally concocted by the Trump regime. It is a form of political prosecution. Pam Bondi posted on Twitter that the Department of Justice will seek the most serious available charges against all participants in these criminal mobs, including conspiracy offenses, assault offenses, civil disorder offenses, and terrorism offenses. Absolute nonsense. I mean, just absolute nonsense. How are you going to pursue terrorism offenses for somebody for banging on a car, if that's what she was accused of doing? Could you imagine you bang on a hood and then suddenly you're a terrorist? Meanwhile, Dylan Roof mass murdered 9 black people. He wasn't charged with terrorism. Are you kidding me? This is absurd. I have no idea how the federal government is going to actually defend this in court, but my concern is the precedence that this sets. This is going to intimidate other activists, and that's fundamentally the point here, is to tell other activists that, hey, you better back down now and stop speaking up so loudly. You better stop going to these No Kings protests. Otherwise, we're going to charge you with terrorism. That is what's being done here. Understand this. Make no mistake. This is a very deliberate, coordinated prosecution. I wouldn't be surprised if Stephen Miller is behind it, to strike fear in the hearts of ordinary folks. And I'm telling you guys, if you're afraid now, capitulating to a bully is only going to make it worse in the future. Those of us who have the privilege of being a U.S. citizen, of having a platform, this is the time to speak up. This is the time to make your voice heard. I've shared my story with you that just a few months ago, I criticized a judge for detaining a U.S. citizen on an ICE detainer and refusing to let him go even after they proved that he was a U.S. citizen. I called it fascism. The chief judge of that court tried to get me stripped of my law license, filed a 25-page complaint against me to get me stripped of my law license. I could have apologized and recanted and retracted. I fought back, cost me more than $10,000 out of my own pocket, and we won that case. And when the judge filed an appeal, we won that too. Because I'm not going to back down to these fascists. I'm not going to back down to the argument that you can just detain a U.S. citizen, you can charge a U.S. citizen with terrorism for banging on a car. Meanwhile, actual white supremacists who mass murdered black people get to walk away from terrorism charges? Absurd. And so I don't expect every person to be out on the streets. Like I've said, we need messengers, not martyrs. I don't want anyone to put their life on the line, but I want everyone to do something, whether it's contributing to a cause, whether it's subscribing and keeping yourself educated, whether it's showing up and protesting peacefully. Everyone can do something. And you must. Because otherwise, the precedent that's being set here is to say that anyone who disobeys or disagrees with what the Trump regime is doing is a terrorist. That's what they're trying to do. And if we allow that kind of precedence to get set, we are all in a crap ton of trouble. Because fascism is a one-way street. And once that's established, we are in a lot of trouble. Which actually segues nicely to the final segment of the show, where I want to talk about a concept called soft secession. I argue that the only question Democratic governors, mayors, county presidents should be asking is this: when will we coordinate to enact our soft secession from the federal government? In August, a journalist named Christopher Armitage wrote an excellent piece titled, "It's Time for Americans to Start Talking About Soft Secession." You can read it on Substack. But he summarizes the paradox of American federalism in 2025. He says basically this. He says, quote, "The same constitutional structure that allows red states to ban abortion permits blue states to stockpile abortion pills. The same 10th Amendment that lets Texas deploy its National Guard to the border prevents Trump from commandeering state police for deportations." What I'm arguing is that it's past time to simply talk about soft secession. We need to act upon it immediately. It is a moral, ethical, and yes, legally right thing to do. The federal government has ceased to function for the public good. Let's just be clear about that. It's currently shut down with no sign of reopening. Some 40 million Americans face starvation as the SNAP program is suspended, basically food stamps. I grew up on food stamps. I know how much people need that to live. It's going to be shut down by the time you're listening to this. Congress, unless something drastic happens in the next 24 to 48 hours. Congress continues to funnel tax breaks to billionaires and weapons manufacturers. Mike Johnson's House has been in session for less than 14 days out of the last 100. That's insane to me. Could you imagine working 14% of the time and still getting your full paycheck and all your benefits? By the way, these are the same people that are demanding work requirements. They work 14% of the time and they're demanding work requirements. Are you kidding me? The hypocrisy and the gall of it all. So I argue that it's time for the Democratic state and local governments to respond with soft secession by withholding federal taxes. And I'm going to have a future show where I talk about how that's practically done. I'm writing co-authoring a piece with a tax lawyer to really detail that, because there's many ways to peel that onion. But the action is to withhold federal taxes. I'm going to make the argument in just a minute. But then spend those funds on our own residents of those respective states. This must continue until the federal government can ensure it will actually uphold human rights and human dignity for all people in this country, as our Constitution requires. But because the federal government cannot or will not fulfill its obligations to the American people, then we must say it clearly: it's time for soft secession. So let's address this. Let's kind of dive into what this is. First of all, what the hell is soft secession? It doesn't sound like a very threatening word. And it's actually not meant to be a threatening word. It's meant to be a call to action. In a phrase, soft secession is nonviolent non-cooperation. It's when states and cities refuse to cooperate with a derelict or illegitimate federal government. It's not through violence. It's not through formal separation. It's not through war. But it's through the reassertion of local sovereignty. For example, states that protect abortion access even as the federal government refuses to act. Cities that deny ICE access to their property, even as ICE tries to arrest whoever they want. States that pass stronger gun safety and minimum wage laws than federal standards. But here's the problem. Each of these examples that I just gave you are reactive. There are steps taken only after the harm is done. What we need is a proactive soft secession. Policies that anticipate and recognize federal failure and then act before lives are lost, before rights are stripped, before the harm is done. Why should states have to wait for SNAP funding to expire, for their citizens to suffer and starve before they act proactively? Why not just prevent the starvation in the first place. What a concept, right? I mean, when Washington, D.C. cannot or will not perform its basic obligations, I argue the states not only have the right, but the sovereign duty, the responsibility, their state constitutional responsibility to act. And so it's time for democratic states, democratic cities, democratic counties to move from this whole defensive posturing of defensive posturing and reactive measures to a proactive protection, to use their constitutional authority to safeguard the residents' economic security, our human rights, with this concept of soft secession. And here's the thing. Every state government, all 50 states, they have a moral and constitutional obligation to safeguard the welfare of its people. That's why they have state constitutions. And this obligation doesn't just disappear when there's a federal government shutdown. In fact, it becomes even further enhanced. And so when the federal government stops feeding hungry families, when it blocks infrastructure money and aid that has already been approved. For example, Chicago was approved for $2 billion. It's being blocked now arbitrarily because Trump doesn't like that a black man won't bend the knee to him. Talking about Mayor Brandon Johnson. He's standing up strong to Trump and is pissing Trump off. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to block more than $2 billion in infrastructure funding that you fought for, that you got. I'm going to block it. Nonsense. So in this situation, states must step in. It's not only justified, but they're obligated to do so. For example, here's why I say it's obligated. I'm in Illinois. Here's a preamble to the Constitution of Illinois. It says that we, the people of the state of Illinois, in order to provide for the health, safety, and welfare of the people, maintain a representative and orderly government, eliminate poverty and inequality, assure legal, social, and economic justice, provide opportunity for the fullest development of the individual, ensure domestic tranquility, etc., do ordain and establish this Constitution of the state of Illinois. And all that stuff that I just said about providing for health and safety, for the welfare, for eliminating poverty, for economic justice, how do you do that if you watch SNAP get canceled for 2 million Illinoisans, more than 15% of our population? How do you prevent poverty, economic injustice, stunted development due to the lack of food, if you're going to allow it to happen? You can't. You cannot fulfill your constitutional obligations if you're going to allow 2 million of your residents to starve. Allowing Illinoisans to starve because Washington, D.C. hoards Illinois' tax dollars, it's an abdication of our constitutional duties. Simple as that. And the thing is, this injustice becomes even more extreme. I'm not just talking about Illinois. If you look nationwide, there's a study done by Time Magazine from 2018 to 2022. Individuals and organizations from blue states contributed to 60% of all federal tax receipts. 60%. Red states, only 40%. That, by the way, is more than $1 trillion annually transferred from blue states to red states. $4,300 per person. Yeah, people in blue states are paying $4,300 per person to people in red states. You know how they're always talking about, Republicans are talking about, get off your ass and work, and, no more socialism, and, no more handouts. They are the welfare queens that they've been warning you about. They are the ones living off federal welfare. On a county level, by the way, it's even a worse disparity. Blue counties comprise 71% of the U.S. economy. Red counties, 29%. So whatever it is, Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, Social Security, education, blue states bankroll red states. And those red states are actively undermining our democracy. That's not federalism, that's economic extortion. And people are going to say, oh, well, the supremacy clause means you can't. No, this has nothing to do with the supremacy clause. The supremacy clause does not prevent states from setting a higher standard of protection. For example, the federal minimum wage is $7.25. 34 states have passed a higher minimum wage. You can't say, well, the federal law is supreme, so therefore it can only be $7.25. No, the federal law is simply the base minimum. States can pass more strict or better legislation to protect rights. And this has happened throughout American history. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, northern states said, hell no, we're not going to honor this. Vermont passed legislation refusing enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act. Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional and therefore unenforceable. The Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s, many cities and states said, we're not going to enforce segregation. Are you insane? Even though federal law was segregation, many states and cities said, no, we're going to have integration. And the federal government finally caught up. Massachusetts recognized same-sex marriage a decade before the Supreme Court did. It was illegal on a federal level. Massachusetts said, no, we don't care. Marijuana legalization of the 2010s. Colorado and California said, we're going to legalize it. I know it's on a schedule of federally banned substances, but we're going to legalize it. And now Congress is finally catching up. These are all acts of soft secession. Each expanded access to justice and equality for millions of people proactively rather than waiting for the federal government to catch up. And so that has to be the path forward in withholding tax dollars that we continue to send to the federal government that it uses to attack and to starve our own residents. See, soft secession is not about abandoning the Union or the Constitution. It's actually about defending it. It's actually about preserving the lives, the rights, the dignity of those that the federal government has callously abandoned or cruelly targeted due to their immutable characteristics. Blue states and blue counties generate the vast majority of the nation's wealth. And they have the power to ensure that wealth serves their people first. Especially when Washington breaks its social contract, states must honor their own. Look, when you have the financial power to do good and you don't use it, I'm sorry, but you're complicit. If you have the power and you don't use it, you're complicit. So I say to those Democratic governors and mayors and county presidents, I say this: protecting the rights of your residents is not rebellion. It's responsibility. It's the reassertion of state sovereignty to prevent famine, to preserve infrastructure, to protect democracy from collapse. Republicans use the states' rights argument to deny equal justice. We should use it to protect equal justice. We should use it to preserve dignity. You know, they want to dominate people and deny them rights. We should preserve dignity. This is not a violation of the supremacy clauses of the Constitution. It is a fulfillment of it. All right, my friends, thank you for tuning in. Another great show wrapped up. Be sure to tune in, same time, same place next week. We have a phenomenal guest next week as well. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. My friends, we'll see you next week. Peace.